Hello. Today is June 19th, 2020. The first time we're celebrating the Juneteenth holiday. Um, I want to address what I'm calling the conspiracy to kill American dream by the elite. How I'm going to first do it, I'm going to go through several posts I made earlier this month that I think just because people's short attention span didn't get as much recognition as I would have thought it would have. So I'm gonna go read through these posts and uh, add a little bit more context to it, and then in a second video, I'm going to actually try to address the conspiracy a little bit more directly. But all right, so first, like after the protests, the supposed peaceful protests had occurred, I decided to like kind of lay out some things because finally the picture became a little clearer for me than, it had been in the past. I always thought there was things going on, but now it's like, okay, I see something a little different now with videos being caught of people doing things. But anyway, I wrote a series of posts. I numbered them 1 through 19 so that people would know to like go back and follow, but that didn't happen. Anyway, the first post I had here was that, it was a fact. Being black doesn't equal being a Democrat. I think even for me, from like early on, I've always associated like black people with Democrats, and you hear Joe Biden say you're not black if you're not like that sort of brainwashing thing is something that we have to, I think, get rid of. Like, everybody needs to understand that black doesn't equal being a Democrat. Two, the second one was more of an opinion. I said that racist people come in both Democrat and Republican. You know, that's again with this association between Democrat and being black, and then of course Republican tend to have a lot of white people and less less black representation. So therefore, white people Republican, black people Democrat. Something that we need to kind of get out of our head, and also, the idea that the Republicans are where all the races are. There's races on both sides. It's not just Republicans are white, so they're all racist, and the Democrats and those they love us, like what I'm saying, they love black people. Let's get that, undo that, thinking. The third point was another opinion theory, was that racism is one of the main mechanisms used by the elite to divide. They invest tons of money in keeping it alive. This actually did get more attention. I think a lot of people see that, the people, the way that things are presented are just to just constantly divide people. And, racism isn't something like we're born with. It's just something that's kind of perpetuated through the news, through, so many things. Just, look at people race, judge them by the race. And I think we all kind of like got a feeling that that this is kind of being forced on us just to keep people separated. The fourth point I also said was a fact. In 1860, many Southern Democrats formed the Confederacy that fought against the Union during the Civil War to keep slavery alive. This is kind of going back to things that we know, but not really making a connection. And what I'm trying to do here is connect these dots for people. Avoid the noise. Understand what I just said. It was the Democrat Party that formed the Confederacy because they were the Southern slave owners, and they decided they were going to pull out when Abraham Lincoln won the election, and he was a Northern. He created the Republican Party in order to abolish slavery. So again, this idea of Democrat and Republican needs some rethinking. 5, slavery involves sex trafficking, pedophilia, and the torture of African people. Now I added this just to kind of like tell it how it is. Like, too many people try to use the slavery and it's like this all-encompassing word. Well, understand something. When you're being sold as property, you know, they looked at, they could do whatever they want to do. It's raping goats. You know, they molest goats and everything else. Well, they molested the women, they molested the children that they received. I ain't gonna say 100% of the time, but again, this is what it was involved. They were sold into slavery with Europeans, sold from Africans into slavery with Europeans, where this was occurring. So for those who have issues with those issues, then this should sound even worse and make you uncomfortable, because it was a very uncomfortable thing for all of us to have to learn about as well. 6 was a fact as well. Southern Democrats were segregationists that fought for Jim Crow laws. Some of them switched to the Republican Party when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed by Lyndon B. Johnson. So if you following along here, you know, yes, for those who say that, you know, the Republicans are part of the problem, well, listen, during this time, you know, you watch double agent movies, people are being put all over the place. So, right, can't really trust either party as much, but understand where it stemmed from, like where it started. It all comes from, you know, this Democratic Party. I'm going down this line. 7, many white and black Americans share a common bloodline, whether because of the rape of African ancestors or voluntarily through love of free slaves. That's just a fact. Need people to understand, you know, we're not just talking about brothers in Africa. I mean, we have European blood. That's why we come in all these different shades. 8, theory, opinion. Segregationists wanted to keep white and black separated to purify the bloodlines. If you were 1/8 black in some states, you would be considered white. And I would kind of get into why you would want to keep it segregated. I mean, if you see, and first of all, you have to be reminded that you, now that you're dealing with free slaves, you have to be reminded that, you know, you actually committed these crimes against these people. And also that some of them may, you know, be family and maybe have some sort of entitlement to your, you know, land or some type of inheritance. So yeah, you stay away from me, I'll stay away from you, since we have to consider you people now. So this is the segregation. This is why I think, you know, they wanted to kind of separate everybody. 9, fact, Martin Luther King, like many Southern blacks, was a registered Republican, as many Southern white Democrats were segregationists. Now, this was something that I heard a few years ago. I never really looked into, but it really caught me off guard. It made sense because, you know, a lot of times the Republicans are always evangelic, I'm saying this word wrong, but, you know, again, Christian, always, you know, talking, you know, Jesus and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, well, what's the issue, you know, moral wise with the blacks? Because I mean, they pretty much, a lot of blacks are Christians that, you know, kind of say the same thing. So it was like, okay, well, it must just be the economic part of it, because for the most part, a lot of blacks and the whites, they you know, they're following the same religion. It's like, it was, but it made sense to me because of that. You know what I mean? Again, you have a preacher, a minister, you know, kind of being a Republican made sense that he, you know, he would have to follow. But I mean, the reason why is because the Southern Democrats were the segregationists. They were the ones that were enforcing the Jim Crow laws and such that, you know, aren't federal laws. 10, fact, in 1960, Martin Luther King was arrested during a student-led sit-in a segregated Atlanta department store. In a politically calculated move, John F. Kennedy negotiated the Southern segregationists with Southern segregationists to have him freed. Again, something that I never really looked into before. There was a backstory I read on it was like time.com, where they basically said that, Martin Luther King was kind of pressured into doing this sit-in. He didn't really want to do it with these young college students. They basically was trying to force the presidential candidates, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon at the time, to have to come out and speak on civil rights. At the time, Martin Luther King was actually supposed to be pretty close with Richard Nixon, who would kind of come to him and ask him about how to deal with the black community, how to this, and always kind of seeking his advice. So he felt a little bit, slighted when it was John F. Kennedy who got him free from jail. Now, the backstory kind of goes a little bit further and says that, it's all happened within 30 hours of him being arrested. But John F. Kennedy didn't really, want to get too much more involved in it. But he was kind of like talked into by some of the people of his campaign that it would look good if he called Martin Luther King's wife, who was pregnant at the time. And, basically he called and in a 90-second conversation told her, like, he's sorry for what happened to your husband. And if you need anything, you can always reach out to me. And basically Martin Luther King came out of jail, said that, he's thankful to John F. Kennedy. And, even though he knows it was a politically motivated move, he does feel that he actually cares because he heard it from trusted sources, meaning that he heard it from his wife that, he actually called and kind of, consoled her a little bit. So again, information to me, news to me, but kind of like leads on to this point. This 11th point fact that Martin Luther King supported John F. Kennedy in the 1960 election. And he ended up getting 70% of the black vote, which helped him get a narrow win over Nixon. Now, the reason that, again, his campaign was against it was because they were worried about losing some of those Southern Democratic states that believed in segregation. And they thought that, Martin Luther King, who keeps fighting against segregation, that was going to hurt them lose the states. But what happened was he ended up getting so many other, so much more of the black vote than what was expected that he ended up winning like Illinois and like, other states that, where blacks came out in huge numbers, and they weren't expecting that to happen because blacks were usually voting for a Republican. And I said a conspiracy theory. Now, I watch a lot of History Channel. What I'm writing here is that John F. Kennedy was killed in 1963, not by a white supremacist because he proposed the Civil Rights Bill in 1961, but by his own Democrat-led government because he supported sharing tech secrets with Russia. Again, you're looking at it, he proposed the bill in 1961, but at the time we know that he was worried about sending people to the moon. That was the big thing. I can't get into the timing of it. I don't want to even look that deep into that, but I did watch something else that kind of talked about because of the Russia and the space program. He had a desire to kind of share information back and forth with Russia, and people in the government were very opposed to that. And there was supposedly some burnt letter that, supposed to have survived the fire or something like that, that says something about, make it wet, as far as like assassinating him. Again, it was all of this attention around whether, how the person made this shot that killed him. And so, there's always been conspiracy about who killed John F. Kennedy. I'm kind of pointing at that it wasn't, related so much to the Civil Rights Bill that he just proposed and didn't actually push through. 13, the fact, Martin Luther King, like many other blacks, an example, Muhammad Ali, was against the Vietnam War that Lyndon B. Johnson escalated from 16,000 to over 500,000 troops by 1967. Again, if you heard Muhammad Ali's story, he, basically said, I'm not going to go to no war to fight for a country that don't care about black people or care about me. He ended up not, losing like 3 years of his career. I think he was arrested. But basically, up until Lyndon B. Johnson sort of upped the troops, the 16,000 troops that were over there weren't actually fighting. This war started in 1954. They were just basically over there as giving advice. They were no part of the war where they fighting. And then, of course, he escalated this war, sending troops over there. And now we got involved in this fight where people had to be drafted and all this other stuff. 14, fact, March 26, 1968, Martin Luther King announced he would not support Lyndon B. Johnson for re-election in the 1968 presidential election. I go on to the next one. 15, March 31st, this is 5 days later, 1968, Lyndon B. Johnson announced he would not seek the Democratic Party's nomination for president. Now, obviously, they got a good win because they didn't won over the black vote, because, mainly because Martin Luther King decided to vote for both John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson. Now Martin Luther King is saying, I won't support you going forward. He basically declines, running for re-election. Then I put a conspiracy theory here. Democrats hijacked the black vote by killing Martin Luther King on April 4th, 1968, again, 5 days later, before he could take the black vote back to the Republican Party. Again, who was the only Republican candidate that year? That would have been Richard Nixon, the former, the friend that Martin Luther King thought he was pretty close to. He said he regretted voting for Lyndon B. Johnson, and a couple of days later, he gets killed by this guy, white supremacist, who was jumping for joy. Yeah, I did it. Similar to the way that you see Al Qaeda pretty much taking credit for everything, and then a week later he decides, I didn't do it. And actually, what was interesting was that his Martin Luther King's family visited him several years later and actually tried to get the case reopened, which to me tells me that they may believe that he didn't do it. They always say there's no evidence found. Basically did it by himself. He knew where Martin Luther King was going to be. You don't got cell phones, you don't got all of this, but he knew exactly where he was going to be, set up in the building across the way, took a shot. Not that he was like some professional or something like that, but yeah, he's the one that assassinated Martin Luther King. I don't think so. 17, fact. Most of America's black people live in democratic-led cities. Just a fact. I don't know, 6, 7 big cities. Obviously New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. I mean, all of these are run by Democrats. 18, segregationism. What I'm gonna do here is I'm comparing it to gentrification. I said gentrification, anyone? Like, gentrification is basically you fix up a neighborhood. If you had low income housing and suddenly, we're gonna turn that. There's no longer be any low income housing. So, or if black older people owned a home over there, and now you raising taxes so that they can't afford it. So now they're being forced to sell and basically get out the neighborhood that they were in. Don't you think they want to be part of a up and coming neighborhood, like if their neighborhood is improving? But again, we're in a Democratic-led city. Democrats in the South believed in segregation. And now we got this gentrification. And I go on to say that black neighborhoods were burnt down because most whites don't live in those same neighborhoods. We talking about all this protest and how we have to, make a, be civil disobedience. We got to burn stuff and all of this. Well, you're burning down your own stuff because they don't live in the neighborhoods, and those that did, they're going to move out. So it's really the black neighborhoods that suffered. And then 19, last but not least, I said, if systematic racism against blacks exists, then it is Democratic leadership that is overseeing it. Of course, most people just focused on that one and didn't, follow through the numbers like how I expected them to. But I mean, that's just the reality. Like, we're saying that we see it. You have people outside of these cities saying that they don't see systematic racism, and you're sitting there trying to like reconcile the two. And it could be clear. It's that, you know, the Republicans that are sitting here speaking on it sometimes out of turn, and then, you know, and that's why Republicans kind of need to take a step back and actually think about this for a moment as well. That we're talking about two different things. You're talking about where you live, and we're talking about where we live. You know, we see the system is not set up for black people. We see it being treated, but we don't live in your Republican-led cities or towns or wherever you at. We live in the Democratic-led cities, and we're seeing it. So you can't just dismiss it. You know, you look at stats, and yes, the stats may be true, but it doesn't explain the stop and frisk, the policies that are in place. Like, you don't have to have those policies in place. The reason that our interaction with the police is that it's because the legislation that's in place is allowing the police to do certain things that you may not think they should be able to do, that we don't think that they should be able to do, but they're doing it, and then they don't have to do it, but they're allowed to do it. See what I'm saying? And because of that, you know, you're doing it more so in the poorer neighborhoods, which tends to be the black neighborhoods. And because people are getting treated this way, that's why we're saying systematic. It's a systematic issue for us. It may not be a systematic issue where you live, but it was important to point out to those that live here to understand, and ourselves to say like, okay, they're saying they don't see it, but we're seeing it. Understand who's in charge, and let's be fair about that. Don't get caught up with all of the nonsense. We live in a Democratic-led city. It's been Democrat. Even if there's been a Republican in there somewhere, you know, in the 80s or whatever, still the city council has been Democrat. You know, they're to block them and get in their way from doing anything. So, Democratic-led city. And then I went on and made another post, and this was after I didn't really want to go after the Black Lives Matter or any of these Antifa things, because for the most part, I mean, I look at them as being like the hired gun. They're just the tool. You're not going to aim at the gun. You're going to aim at the person using the gun. And they're a moving target. I mean, if you've been following Black Lives Matter, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, they had on their website, you know, their mission was completely, it was a lot different. I shouldn't say completely different, but it was a lot different than it is now. I mean, what still exists is that they don't believe in the nuclear family, but some other things have changed where they incorporated more of the, you know, black men, whereas before there was like no mention of black men. Like, they didn't care about black men, but since I guess they keep showing up to black men being killed, now they actually have to put that on there. So, I mean, I didn't want to get, you know, come after them early on, because it'll be a losing battle. Like, nobody want to listen if they go on their website now and it says something different. I'm you know, what am I bringing it up for? But anyway, once they kind of came out and start talking about this abolish police thing, that kind of, you know, set me off a little bit. So I went ahead and you know, wrote this, and I'm gonna read it in a little dramatic way, how I think it should have been read. So that's what I wrote. Listen, everyone, Black Lives Matter. But understand something. This organization, Black Lives Matter, has its own agenda. An agenda that has not been discussed with you, has it? With your church? With your community leaders? What we can see is they have a very strong support from the Democratic Party. They're able to flood us with their messaging through all forms of media, a brainwashing tactic. They've admitted that they're against the Western idea of the nuclear family. You know, the one where the father and the mother are both present to raise their children together. Does this represent your belief about what Black community needs? I thought we agreed one of the biggest issues was that fathers were not in the households with their children to raise them on a daily basis. What we now hear them screaming for is the abolition of the police departments around the country. Was this what Black people wanted? Or do we want fair and equal treatment under the law, something most Americans can get behind? They're in a full out, to use a football reference, a full out blitz to overwhelm the masses, try not to give anyone a chance to really think about what is being proposed. What is our game plan in Philadelphia? I've seen everyone flooding my timeline the last couple of years with cries for peace among our young men dead set on killing each other and actually killing a number of kids with stray bullets in the meantime. Are we planning on them now forming a militia to protect the kids and our elderly from crime when calling the police isn't an option anymore? What happened to all the Illuminati conspiracists out there? Did all that just disappear, or are we getting a closer view of how they actually operate? During these protests, they're defacing statues of Abraham Lincoln, a poor white man that started a war against rich slave owners for the freedom of black people. They're holding up signs condemning the peaceful protests of great leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King went against the Southern segregationist Democrats by using peaceful protests such as sit-ins and boycotts in order to desegregate the blacks from whites. What are these videos of people we've never seen or have any reason to trust asking us to do? They're asking us to perform self-imposed segregation. Many of you agree with me that racism is a mechanism used by the rich in order to divide the lower classes. Well, how do you think it's implemented? We're seeing it in real time right now. They're telling a bunch of white people, many of whom don't live anywhere near the democratic cities and therefore black people, that they're personally responsible for our plight. They then flood their media with images of black people beating up white people trying to protect their property. They show black people burning down their own neighborhoods to fight back against their oppressors. Like, what? This is how you create racism, a hate of people you don't know based purely on their race. This is not for black people. This is actually a full-out attack against black people. You are not woke, #woke, by supporting this. But instead, we need to #wake up before this sets us back decades. So yeah, in response to them basically doing this abolish police, it gave me the green light to kind of address that issue anyway. But yeah, anyway, I'm on do a second part. I don't want to get into anything else on this one's already running pretty long. And this time around, people, if y'all feeling what I'm saying, I'm gonna say it on the next one too. If y'all feeling what I'm saying, share it. I'm trying to use my voice a little, put it out there, try to clear up some, the picture for some people. I know it's a lot of information out here. I'm pretty good at filtering out the noise, and that's what I'm trying to do right here. Focus on what's important, focus on the actual facts, and so like it, share it, I can't right now. This is about all I can do, as far as like trying to address this. So yeah, look for my look at the second part of this video, second video I'm gonna do shortly.